Thanks for joining us. Today's Synology Partner Online Training webinar will provide a security checklist for storage deployment. We'll go over a list of best practices to make your Synology NAS as secure as possible. Let's begin by looking at some of the challenges faced in any network storage deployment. Regarding system security, we'll take a look at how to keep your operating system up to date, as well as some other general settings that can be put in place very easily to make sure your system is as secure as possible. Then we'll take a look at network settings. Because your NAS is connected to other computers and the internet, there's always an opportunity for malicious intrusion. So we'll put some changes in place to minimize our risk. Then we'll get into data security. We'll talk about redundancy in your hard drives, monitoring their health to predict failure, and then we'll take a look at some of our most common backup and replication tools to make sure that your data exists in multiple places at the same time. Finally, we'll look at user security. In any multi-user environment, there's always a risk that user negligence will create loopholes or vulnerabilities in your system. I'll show you some easy ways to circumvent those risks. Let's begin with system security. We'll take a couple minutes to go over how you enable auto-updating of our operating system. Obviously, you want to keep the OS up to date so that any security enhancements we've released will apply to your system. We'll make sure that you're subscribed to our e-news so you can receive notifications when we discuss new vulnerabilities or threats. We'll set up system notifications to make sure that whether you're at the office or on vacation, you're still going to know the status of your system to make sure you can give it the attention it needs if a situation does arise. And finally, we'll talk about preventing power failure, particularly how to integrate a UPS battery backup system with your Synology NAS. That way, if the power goes out, you're not going to lose data. Let's go into DSM and take a look at some of these functions. This is DSM. It's our browser-based operating system. DSM stands for Disk Station Manager. Most of what we do today is going to be found in the control panel section of DSM. Let's start here. In the System tab, Update and Restore is going to show us where we can get to DSM auto update settings. In this screen, you'll see some system specs and a button for update settings. Here you can choose to install the newest version of DSM and all updates, or just important updates only. Below that, you can choose when you'd like to schedule the updates to be installed. I'd recommend doing this at a time when your system's not under normal use, like 3:10 a.m., for example. Next, let's subscribe to Synology e-news. If you haven't done this when you set your system up the very first time, it's very easy. Pop over to our website, click Sign In the upper right, and once you log in or create an account, there'll be a Personal Information tab. Here, under Subscription Settings, make sure you've checked Important Updates for DSM, as well as Security Advisory. Click those and hit Submit. Now let's set up system notifications. Under Control Panel, find the Notification button under the System section. Here, the Advanced tab will list all the different notification triggers you can have your system alert you to, whether that's a new user logging in, a hard drive failing, or a power supply being disconnected. You want to make sure you set your notification preferences to reach you via email, SMS, or mobile alert. You can even filter these by category if you want to look through quickly, as there are over 100 different triggers. The other tabs allow you to enter the information about where those accounts should reach you, whether it's your email, your SMS, or push notifications on a mobile device. We'll talk more about notifications as we go through this webinar. Next, let's talk about preventing power failure. Under the control panel, the Hardware and Power button has a tab called UPS. An uninterruptible power supply or battery backup is a great way to make sure that your system doesn't shut down if power goes out or even if it just cuts out for a second. However, those batteries only last so long, and once your battery runs out, we want to avoid having your system in use and have your drive spinning when power is cut from the unit. So you can actually enable UPS support and link your unit via USB or IP address to a UPS server. And once you do this, it's going to make sure that when that battery is about to run out, your system actually unmounts all the data volumes, and that way it stops all services so that you're not actually accessing the drives when power is cut. Alternately, you can specify a specific time, a number of seconds, minutes, or hours that the unit enters this safe mode when you revert to battery backup. So check out our website for a list of compatible UPS options. There are hundreds. Let's move on and talk about network security. There's a few things you'll want to do to make sure your system network configuration is as secure as possible. First, I'll show you how to block login attempts from IP addresses and robots and hackers that are trying to guess your user passwords and log in over and over and hack your system. Then we'll change our default port settings. All Synology servers ship with the same ports. We don't want to use the same ports as everyone else. We'll install an SSL certificate. If you are unfamiliar with SSL certificates, they allow you to log into your unit remotely and verify that you're actually reaching your unit. This is something that people will install on web servers to make sure you're actually getting to the site you intend to get to. The same thing goes with remote access for a Synology NAS. Finally, we'll allow only HTTPS connections. That way all network traffic to the unit will be encrypted. Let's pop back into DSM and take a look at these functions. First, to block IP addresses that are trying to log in maliciously, go to your control panel. Now you'll find the security section under the connectivity area. Click this and go to the Accounts tab. Auto block is the first section that comes up. By default, this is enabled. The default settings mean within 5 minutes, if someone makes 10 attempts and fails to log in, it's going to blacklist that IP address. This is a really good thing. Now you can enable block expiration if you want these blocks to release automatically, or you can manually edit them from this allow block list. So you could create IPs that are always allowed in, or view a list of blocked IPs. This is also where you could go and unblock an IP if it was just a forgetful user and not actually an attempt at malicious entry. Next, let's change the default ports for DSM. Go to your control panel and click on the network settings. The far right tab is DSM settings. Here you'll see DSM ports HTTP and HTTPS at the top. By default, these will be 5000 and 5001. Now, I've already changed these ports, but I would recommend that you change yours as well. That way, we're not all using the same default ports. Next, let's install an SSL certificate. There's two parts to this process. First, go to Control Panel and External Access. Here, the DDNS tab allows you to add a domain name to your system so that it can access and reach your system. If you have your own domain, you can use your existing registrar's info here, or if you don't have one, like me, Synology has a free service that allows you to create your own domain. Let's try webinardomain.synology.me. Click Test Connection. It will tell us if the domain is available. Looks like it is. Status is normal. Put in your email address, agree to the terms, and press OK. Now we've tied this domain to this server. The next step is to go into Control Panel, and we're going to actually request an SSL certificate. So under the security settings, there is a certificate tab. Now the default certificate shows up. Go ahead and click Add, and here we can actually add a new certificate. Today we'd like to get a certificate from Let's Encrypt. Let's Encrypt is a free open certificate authority. Let's try our domain. Make sure to enter the same email address that you used on the other screen. Hit Apply. Now in real time, DSM is going to talk to Let's Encrypt and actually request a certificate. It will be generated and assigned to our system in a matter of seconds. Here we can see webinardomain.synology.me has been added to our system. Be sure to click Configure and choose which services will actually use the certificate. So here you can choose these drop-downs and make sure to select a new certificate for whatever services you would like to require the SSL certificate on. Go ahead and hit OK. The last thing I'd like to show you for network security is how to allow only HTTPS connections. For this, let's head into Control Panel. The Network section has a DSM tab. We were here earlier. Right below the DSM ports, click Automatically Redirect HTTP Connections to HTTPS. I'm not going to do this right now because it would require the web server to restart. Let's talk about data security. Most of our units will support RAID 1, 5, 6, or 10. You can choose whatever type of RAID you prefer. By having redundant hard drives, it makes sure that even when a drive fails, your data is not lost. Because remember, with hard drives, it's not a matter of whether or not they fail, it's just a matter of when they fail. I'll also show you how to schedule smart testing to make sure that your hard drive health is monitored. After that, we'll get into snapshotting and backing up your system. It's one thing to have a hard drive redundancy, but a true backup should live off-site. That way, in the event of a primary site meltdown, you can always recover your data from a separate geographical location. Snapshotting is also a great way to roll back from human errors. Let's go into DSM and take a look at these functions. First, to look at our RAID type, let's actually go into the main menu and Storage Manager. Here we can see everything related to hard drives and storage in our system. The Volumes tab will show us what RAID volumes have been created in our system already. Looks like I have a RAID 1, which means I have 2 hard drives in this unit and they're mirroring one another. If either one fails, I can simply remove the dead drive, put a new drive in, and it's going to rebuild that mirror. So I always have redundancy in my data. If you have questions about RAID, check out our website. We've got a great RAID calculator available at the bottom of the website that allows you to actually go through different configurations and experiment to find out how much usable space and how much space you'll have reserved for redundancy with whatever configuration you desire. Also in the Storage Manager, you'll see a tab called HDD SSD, Hard Disk Drive Solid State Drive. Here you can view all the drives in your system. You can expand them and see all the specific details, including the serial number and the drive temperature. By clicking Health Info, you can actually take a more extensive look at smart results and see more detailed information about the drive. To run smart tests, you'll definitely want to choose Test Scheduler. Here you can see I've created a handful of test scheduling tasks. It's as simple as clicking Create and choosing the settings that you prefer for your task, whether you want it to be a quick test, extended test, test all your disks, or only specific disks. Now, I only have 2 disks in this system, but if this was 180 drives in the system, I may very well not want to be scanning 180 drives every day. The second tab on this task panel is where you can choose how frequently those tests will run. Finally, let's take a look at snapshotting and backup. If you have a Plus Series unit or any unit that runs BTRFS as the file system, snapshot replication is available to you. There's 2 parts to this. First, taking the snapshots. Here I have all the different shares on my server. My business data is getting scheduled snapshots taken on a regular basis. I can then go ahead and replicate those snapshots to another Synology NAS at an offsite location. It's as simple as clicking through the wizard, choosing which snapshots you'd like to replicate, and then choosing to replicate, let's say via router. I would simply enter the remote server IP here and just go through the wizard and set up that snapshot replication. Now the nice thing about snapshots is that you can take them in very short intervals, as frequent as 5 minutes. This is a fantastic way to roll back from accidental user error. If you've got a user who accidentally deletes a directory, modifies some files, or basically just rains on everyone's parade, this integrates with Windows Explorer in a way that you can simply right-click and choose to browse through previous snapshots to recover your previous versions. Definitely implement snapshot replication if you have the chance. The other thing I'd like to show you is Hyper Backup. Now, Hyper Backup is a more traditional tool and available on all of our units. Here you can change settings like picking what folders or data you'd like to back up. You can even back up system settings. So if you have an advanced configuration in, let's say, Surveillance Station, for example, choosing Hyper Backup to back up those application configurations is a great idea. Make sure notifications are enabled for this. You can also set up a schedule for these backups to run as frequently as you'd like, with an interval as short as 1 hour. The final tab lets you choose how many versions you'd like to keep. Of course, you can restore to any of these previous versions. One thing about Hyper Backup, this is block level incremental backup. What that means is that, let's say you're backing up 100 megabytes of data, and you modify the files, it becomes 103 megabytes. The second version that you back up will not take up an additional 103 megabytes. It will only take up 3 additional megabytes because this is incremental and you already have the first 100 backed up. That way, it makes it feasible to keep a large number of versions, 256 by default. You can even choose a retention plan to keep daily versions for, let's say, 4 weeks and weekly versions for all time thereafter. One of the nice things about Hyper Backup is that you can back up to just about anywhere. When you create a new task, here you can go ahead and aim it to another Synology NAS or any number of public cloud storage providers like Amazon S3, Microsoft Azure, Amazon Drive, Google Drive, and many more. You can also point to any remote rsync server. This is also a clever wizard-based interface where you simply add the login information and choose where you'd like the data to be stored. Make sure that you're backing up your data, whether it's to a public cloud provider, to another Synology NAS, or another server. You always want your data to exist in multiple locations. Moving on, let's discuss user security. First, I'll show you about file operation logging. You want to know what's going on with your system, and by enabling logging, it gives you the best way to look and keep an eye on how your system is functioning. Then we'll talk about user password strength rules. We don't want your users to pick simple passwords like 123456 because any hacker or robot trying to guess the account login credentials will figure that out almost immediately. We can also enable two-step authentication so that a mobile device is required at every login. I'll show you our Security Advisor software that can actually audit many of the settings we've demonstrated today and advise you if there's any weaknesses in your system. And then we'll take a look at our antivirus software, included at no charge with DSM, to make sure you're scanning the contents of your NAS as well as the system configuration for any malicious software. Let's go back into DSM. First, for file operation logging, there's two places you'll need to enable this. Open up File Station and click on Settings. Here you'll see the first thing is Enable File Station Log. Go ahead and enable that. It is not enabled by default. You can also click View Logs to open up your log center right from this interface. We'll also need to go into the control panel and change one more setting to enable logging. From within your control panel, go to the File Services button. Under the first tab, SMB, AFP, NFS, you can go ahead and enable transfer logs for SMB, scroll down and enable transfer logs for AFP as well. The next tab for FTP has similar options, but unless FTP service has been enabled, you actually won't be able to go down and tell it to configure logs under the advanced settings. Next, let's take a look at our password strength rules. From within the control panel, open up the User section. Here under the Advanced tab, you'll see the first options are password settings. Apply password strength rules is checked by default, but only a couple options are enabled. Exclude name and description of user from password is enabled. This means that if my username is John, my password can't also be John. There's also a minimal password length, in my case, 6 characters. Here you can include other options if you want to use advanced characters, mixed case, or even exclude common passwords like ABCD. Below this, you can choose how frequently you'd like passwords to expire, forcing users to rotate passwords for maximum security. Further down is a two-step verification option. By enabling this, users will be required not only to log in with their username and password, but use an authenticator app, such as Google Authenticator. And using a QR code or a secret key, they'll have to actually log in on a separate device as well as entering their credentials. This is a great way to ensure system security. Let's take a look at our antivirus software. Now this is available for free in the Package Center. I've already downloaded and installed it to save a little bit of time. But go ahead and run a custom scan, a full scan, or a system scan on a regular basis. You can actually open up the interface and choose scheduled scan, create different types of scan events, choose any of those 3 types and the frequency at which you'd like them to scan. Now I've already created several different tasks, so I'm good on my security for antivirus. You can also look at logs, quarantine files, and go ahead and make sure that your virus definitions are all up to date. Looks like I'm all set. The last thing I'd like to show you today is our Security Advisor software. Security Advisor can be accessed through the main menu. Let's go ahead and run a scan and see how my system is. This will tell me if I've missed anything during any of our configuration steps. Fortunately, no malware was found on our system. It's checking DSM. It says it's working well. It does look like we have one account security setting that's not enabled. Let's go ahead and find out what that is. Password strength rules do not meet requirements for work and business. As you recall, my only requirement was that it can't be the same as the username and has to be 6 characters. So this would allow a simple password like 123456. Fortunately, Security Advisor has reminded me I'll have to change that after the webinar so that we don't get the system compromised. Let's take a look and see what network issue it found. Looks like automatic redirection from HTTP to HTTPS is disabled. If you recall, I didn't apply my setting during this webinar because it does require the web server to restart. I will do that afterwards. And finally, I have 3 packages out of date. Let's go ahead and open Package Center, which also shows a little 3 in the red bubble, indicating that 3 need updating. You see, as soon as we open it, attention required shows what 3 packages those are, gives me options to update individually, or I can simply click Update All. That's everything I wanted to show you for user security, and wraps up everything we need to cover today. In summary, we took a look at system security, how to set up auto DSM updates, how to turn on notifications and configure your devices to receive them, how to set up UPS battery backup power protection. That ensures that even after your UPS battery runs out, you're not going to lose data because your volumes corrupt because they're still in use when the power cuts. It will safely unmount all your volumes and stop running services. We looked at network security, how to block login attempts. When a hacker or a robot repeatedly tries to log in from an IP address, we want to blacklist that address. We installed an SSL certificate to confirm when you're accessing your system remotely that you are in fact logging into your system and not another site pretending to be your system. We forced HTTPS for encrypted transfer, and we changed from the default ports so that not all users are using the same Synology default ports. We discussed data security, including RAID redundancy, to make sure that even when your hard drives fail, which they will, your data will persist. I showed you how to run smart checks to make sure hard drive integrity is monitored on a regular basis. Then we took a look at snapshotting and backing up your system to another Synology NAS or to a public cloud provider or remote server. Finally, we covered user security. We enabled file operation logging for several different protocols, enforced password strength rules and two-step authentication, and checked out our antivirus. Then at the end, we summed all this up by checking out Security Advisor to make sure we didn't miss anything. It should be clear that Synology's commitment to creating the most secure storage operating system is tremendous. Recently, we've joined the CVE Numbering Authority as one of only 72 CNA vendors, and we're the only vendor in Taiwan. We promise a fast security incident response when any vulnerability is discovered. We'll guarantee a fix within 24 hours and deployment as soon as possible. We're also very engaged with the hacker community. In order to make sure evolving software security continues, we want feedback from the people out there using our products. We actually have a bounty program in place that if anyone discovers a weakness or a loophole in our system, we want to know about it. We'll actually pay several $1,000s for this information. More info on that is available on our website. Thank you for attending today's Synology Partner online training. We hope you found it helpful and look forward to fulfilling all your storage and security needs for many, many years to come. We'll see you next time.